Well, hello crafters and welcome to this Craft With Us session. I'm Michelle Brown, Creative Director from Picture to Page and Beyond, which is your scrapbooking, mixed media art and papercraft community. And we're here today to get to know your paint. So I hope you've had a chance to look at the supply list. You've managed to get out preferably your acrylic paints, but if not, then it's okay to do this with a few other things. And we'll talk a little bit about why we might want to get to know our paints, as well as some of the things we can do with them. So if you have any questions, certainly pop them in the comments. If you're watching live, we'll be able to answer them in real time. If you're watching us on Facebook replay or on YouTube, we will definitely get to your comments in due course. So if there's anything else that you would like to know about the techniques that we use, certainly let us know. And I can see that Ray's there, so hi Ray, thanks for joining us today. It's good to see you. Now we're going to have a bit of a play with paints, and we'll certainly talk more about why we're going to do it, but what we might do is get started. And then we're going to need some time for the gesso to dry, and then we can put the paint on top. So one of the challenges about doing this together is that we're not going to have the time to really let things dry properly. So we just have to be a bit mindful of that as well as we go through this process. Hi Nana, I believe that's Joan. So good to have you here with us as well. And that's what you've got to remember, guys. Make sure that you are giving us hearts and thumbs up. Give us plenty of comments, and of course share these videos with your crafty friends, because we want to build our crafting community and let everyone know about From Picture to Page and of course the joys of paper crafting in these troubled times. So I'm going to now jump over to our desk view, and then we'll go through our supplies and we'll get started. Okay, so what we had on the list with things to do. Hi Libby, I can see you there. Okay, so what we've got is some sheets of card. Now I'm using A3. You could always use index cards. This is something that's got a bit of texture and a bit of thickness to it. You can just see that. I've also got some dictionary pages, some ephemera. Now it doesn't really matter what you use, but what we want is something that has some fairly solid text on it. So as we put the paint across it, it'll help us tell us more about our paints. I've got a glue stick for sticking that down. I've got some gesso. Now I'm going to do a masterclass on gesso soon, and if you don't have any, that's fine, but it's another undercoat and it gives us a hint of a bit more about our paint, so I'll show you how to use that. Some acrylic paints. Now I'm using the new Dilutions paints in a couple of different colours. We'll see how much time we've got to see how many we get through. And then I've got a white and a black as well, so that we can play with tints. I have some paint brushes. I've got, just outside of the screen, I've got some water pots that I'm really hoping I don't spill. I've got a paint palette so we can mix our paints on. What else? A pen so we can write down the colours and the brands of our paints, because this is creating a document of our paints. I've got a towel for drying off my wet paint brushes, and I've got my art journal nearby, because I hate wasting paint, and there's nothing better than taking that excess paint and popping it into an art journal page to give us a place for starting as well. So okay, let's get started, and then we can talk a little bit more about why we'll do this while our gesso is drying. So let's clear some space. Hopefully you've got the computer or your iPad somewhere safe. So the first thing we're going to do is get our ephemera and our glue stick. And we're going to add some pages to our backing card. So glue stick. Now when we talked about our introduction to adhesives, we talked about turning it up just that little bit, holding it up so that it's square, and then adding a good amount. And again, these are just our test cards. These are our references, so that as we get to know our paints, it helps us to know what paints to use or what properties they have, so we can use them to our advantage. Okay, so I've got a little bit more to cover that full page. So again, you can do this on index cards. You can do it in your art journal, and I'll show you an example of one that I've done before. Okay, so I've taken my A4 card and I've put the ephemera on with a glue stick. Now I've got a question from Nana. Says she doesn't have any acrylic paints, but here to play with watercolors. Watercolor paints work exactly the same as do water-soluble crayons. What we're doing here is learning a simple technique that helps us get to know our craft materials better. So it doesn't matter what what you've got. It just gives us a chance, third time lucky, gives us a chance, like I said, to get to know our paints a bit better. So next I'm going to grab gesso. Now I have a separate brush for gesso than I use for my paints, just so I don't get it too mixed up. Like I said, we'll be doing a masterclass in gesso soon, but gesso is a bit of an undercoat. Oops, let's not get that everywhere. So this is quite a runny one. This is the Mont Mart one. And what we're going to do is paint a strip down on our ephemera. Now this is also a good way of getting to know your gesso as well, because what we can see, I should hold it up in a minute, is that even though when it goes on, you can only see through a little bit, and then put that away. But as it dries, the gesso, this gesso brand, becomes more translucent and you can actually see underneath. And we can actually use that to our benefit as well. So you can see there we've got the ephemera on the card, and we've got a little bit of gesso. Okay, now we want to set that aside to dry before we do anything else. So what I'm going to do is set it over here and give it a wave about and talk a little bit about why we might want to do this. So I've got a sample of one I've done previously. So this is when I've done with my Dina Wakley paints, and what it does, we can see that this is the colour. So it helps us know when we compare it to the colour on the bottles what the colour of the paint really is, because when you're printing labels, it's hard to print labels the exact same colour as the paint. So here we can see the colour of the paint, and because we've got the text under it, we can see how transparent it is. And that's really important when it comes to paints, because if we're doing layers or if we want to combine them, knowing how transparent it is helps us know how best to use it. Now if you've got some really spiffy paints, these are my extensive golden collections, they actually put some of the paint on top of their labels, and then you can see how translucent they are. So you can see this teal one is quite opaque, whereas this cobalt turquoise is quite translucent. You can see the lines there. So not all paints have those. So this is why we're doing this technique, to get to know our paints so that we can then have that information. So it's great to know how translucent or how opaque they are, because then if we want to put it on top and block out the colour, we want something that's, you know, like this purple, that's quite opaque, so that we know that the text won't show through. Whereas if we use some of these other colours, we can see here the text showing through. Now on this one, I haven't used gesso. I've mixed it with white and I've mixed it with some glazing medium. So we're not going to do that here today, but glazing medium is a way of making the paint more translucent, but not changing the colour. And you can see here the yellow hasn't changed much with the white, but you can see here that you're getting quite a different colour. And again, you can do a ratio of 1:1 to white or 1:2 and then create it, and it becomes your colour palette, and not just one that you've got off the internet, one that you've actually got with the paints that you own. So you can see there the different colours when white's added, and then what it looks like. So you can see here, you can sort of see the text, but when you've got the glazing medium in, it's a lot more translucent, and the same with the purple. Okay, so I'll show you a few more examples in a minute. Let's see if this is dry. Oh, look, it's close enough. There's very few things I'm patient for, but making sure layers dry underneath is kind of an important one, as well as drawing over it with any sort of markers or pens. Please make sure they're dry or you will ruin many really good markers. Okay, so I'm going to use this first colour. So this one's called Vibrant Turquoise. Like I said, it's the New Delusions one. I'm going to put a little spot onto my palette. Now these paintbrushes at the moment are completely dry. What I might do is just get it a tiny bit wet and then dry it off. So we don't want to be adding any water with our paintbrush, and I will often just put it there. You can feel that it's damp, but it's not at all wet. So what we're then going to do is use some of that paint and go from the card onto the text and then onto the gesso. Now we can see while it's wet, I should say, we can see that this one's quite opaque here, and you can see how it's gone just that little bit lighter on the gesso as well. So it's given us just that started understanding of what colour it is and how it compares to the bottle and the label. Okay, now while that dries, I really hate wasting any of this paint on my paintbrush. So what we're going to do is get our art journal, find a blank page that I found earlier, so you don't have to watch me flicking through. Now this page has already got a little bit of gesso through a stencil. I don't know if you can just see that pattern. So what then I can do with that paintbrush is just add some random colour here and there. And because I've got the gesso already dry through a stencil underneath, you can actually see it starting to show through. So that's one of the things that we love about gesso, is it creates a really nice resistance technique. Okay, now I don't want to wet that brush, but that's just given us a little bit of a start of a background there and help get some of that paint off. Okay, so what I'm going to do next, and again, it depends on how adventurous you are, how far you want to go. What I want to do is add it with some of the white. Now I know that this white is actually quite translucent because I've had to play with it. So again, another dot there. It's probably not quite 1-to-1, isn't it? It's probably a bit more. And then what I'm going to do with my paintbrush is mix it around. And then in the same line, apply it there. So now I can see what my paint looks like, a turquoise, when I've added some white. So it's giving me a lighter turquoise. Excellent. Okay. Hi Sandra, good to see you there. Hi Helen. Okay, so again, we don't want to waste that paint. So I'll get out my art journal. And this is the one that's already got some gesso on the background. I'm getting paint everywhere. And let's just add a little bit more. Okay. Now, just put that brush in the water and get another clean brush. So now we've added some white, and you can see as it's drying that the colour there is actually not that different for it over the gesso. I'm not sure how that looks on your online things. In one camera it looks quite different, on the other one they look all the same. So let's get our paint palette back. Put a little. Now for those of you that have been crafting along for a while, you know that black is a colour that I really tend to avoid. We use very, very little of it because it just goes such a long way. So quite often we'll use an umber or a dark blue. So you can see that I've just put the tiniest amount, because I know when I've done this previously, all we do when we mix black is end up with something really, really dark and pretty unattractive. Okay, so give that a mix. And then next in line, putting it down that colour. Oh. So we can see, again, all that looks like is turquoise added with black, isn't it? So we've got the colour on the card, on the ephemera, over the gesso, mixed with white, and mixed with black. So it actually gives us a really nice sort of dark colour. Okay, and so again, let's let that dry. Grab our art journal. Just use that. Now because it's dark, I don't really want to put too much on, but what I might do is I might grab a stencil, and here's a really cute little one from Darkroom Door. I love this stencil because it's a lot like bubble wrap, but it's got a few little intricacies in it. So also, because our paintbrush is so dry and we don't have a lot of paint on it, we can then just use that to add little highlights onto our art journal layout. Because this is dark and we've got that lighter, we know we can go over it and that'll add. And there is nothing more satisfying than adding circles with a dry brush through a stencil. So you can see now how we're starting to build up the layers of this art journal. It always amazes me when people say, how do I get started in an art journal? It's like, well, you just add some paint and then you add an image and then things happen. Okay, so I'm pretty happy that I've used a fair bit of the paint there. Don't really want to use any of the more of that black. We haven't used much. So let's rinse that and then we'll try another colour. So what I would also do, like we said, is write across the top what paint it is, probably before you've made it all wet. So we know this is the Dilutions. And the colour of this one, where did I put? These colours are so hard to read. So it's Vibrant Turquoise. And you can see how this starts to build up a folio of your paint. So here we know we've added gesso, and this was white, plus white, and this is plus the black. So again, you could go through and do this with blends, with different colours, with the glaze medium, all sorts of different ones. So it really does start to expand and get to know our paints, because firstly we can see how translucent or opaque it is. We can see what it looks like when we mix it with white or black. And it doesn't just have to be the colour that it comes in with the bottle. That's the fantastic thing, of course, with paints and these mediums that can mix, is that we've got all the colours of the rainbow and everything in between at our fingertips. So, okay, let's do another one and see what we get. So here, oops, that was the glue stick falling off the table. So here I've got the funky fuchsia. I might add a little bit more this time because it didn't. Now, we want to clean off our paintbrushes. Now, just a tip for those of you that haven't done a lot of painting, this is the paint pot where the paintbrushes go. This is the glass for water. Now, keep them separate, or what happens is you end up with your paintbrush in your mug of coffee or your water. So there's a tip for newbies, people who are new to painting. Keep your paint pots and your glass of water separate. Now, I've just washed that off in the water, and I'm using the towel to dry it off. So like I said, we don't want to add any extra water to this. We don't want to dilute it. And quite often I have a full range of paintbrushes. Okay, so now we're going to use our funky fuchsia. Oh, that paintbrush has still got some black in it. There we go. Now we can see what it looks like on the cardboard, on the ephemera, and over the gesso as well. So now if we wanted to add the white to it. So again, ratios, all pretty bucket chemistry. I think this was the paintbrush that had the black in it, so that's going to give me an interesting result. Ooh, pretty. Look at that. So that's giving me quite a different colour, but you can see how these colours are similar. I guess the shades, tones, not great on my art theory. Oh, no, I've got it all down there. Okay, so we'll get that out, and next thing we want to do, oh, we wanted to not waste the paint. Oops. I'm getting too excited and not thinking about what I'm doing. So again, fuchsia with the tiniest bit of black. Make sure my paintbrush is clean. You can see why, when I first started doing this, I really thought it was a bit of a waste of paint, because you're only using so little and then discarding it. But if you can use it in your art journal, and again, the value that you get from these cards, it just goes on giving. When you're looking for a particular colour, you can come back through them. There's a few other things we can do as well. So again, perhaps not mixed as well as it should. You can see that gives us a nice, hopefully when that dries, a dark burgundy. So let's get the rest of this paint and the art journal. Okay. Let's add a few more bits and pieces. That was probably a little bit too painty, but that's okay. Oh, you can see, oh, you can't quite see. This one's actually gone quite a nice burgundy colour now with the black in it. Now, of course, you don't have to use a stencil. You can easily create circles, and that's showing up that dry gesso underneath. You can do it in blocks. You can use it to create borders. So it's just a really good way to use up that paint. Oh, how cool is that stencil? I think that's a stencil girl stencil underneath there. Okay. Now, any questions? paint off my hands before I touch the computer. So Sandra says, yeah, it really is a really good reference guide. Again, it's one of those things that I think it was Julie Pritchard. She had done some courses with Golden and with Chris Coven, and she talked about doing that, and it just seemed like sort of a bit of a waste of time. But like you said, once you've done it and you've got it as a reference, you've got them forever. They are a really good resource. Now, the other thing I wanted to show you, now we won't do it today because you really would want to make sure that was completely dry, but what I've done here is got some of my white marker, gel pen and a black gel pen, and just put lines over again so you can see what it looks like on top of your dry paint. So you can see this is actually quite a soft white pastel. You can see there what it looks like over the different colours, and you can see how the different markers have reacted as well. So you can see these as a reference. You could build them up. It's a guide of what colours you've got. If we're looking for, you know, how do we match these colours together? How does the Dilutions pink compare to the Dina Wakley pink? We can immediately pick that up and say, oh yeah, the Dilutions one's just that little bit darker. Then maybe I didn't have a clean brush. So there we go. So let me show you one of the other ones I've done. So this is using ephemera, gesso, black and white. This was using just the white and the liquid glaze. So again, if you've got that, you can try it. You can also consider mixing them with colours. And then if you want something really quick, simple and dirty, this was one that I did when I first just got all these new Dilutions paints, because these have only been out since the start of the year. So in my art journal, just putting in tiny little blips of text. So you could then paint over it, and again, it just shows you all the different colours, and this I've sort of put colours together, and then you can see how transparent they are as well. So again, that helps when you're laying paints, when you're mixing paints, thinking about, do I want it to block out what's underneath, do I want it to show through? You know, there are a few that are a bit more opaque. There's certainly things to consider. Please don't tip over paint. When you're looking at the different colours as well, and there's so many of these colours. Excellent. So any other questions? So Carmel asked, where did the shapes come from in the journal? So what I had done, I'm not sure whether you can see, is I've actually put gesso through a stencil. So again, in the time where I had gesso on a paintbrush, you can just see that that's through a stencil, and it's like sort of an orange, you know, the circle, this shape. And you can see it. Oh yeah, kind of. You can sort of see it there. And then what happens is when I put the paint on, the gesso gives it a bit of a resist, and the bit where the stencil was, so the art journal underneath shows through. So that's where all those shapes have come from. Okay, maybe that wasn't the best page to show you, but it is again a way of showing what some of the things that gesso can do. And we will be doing a masterclass in gesso later this week. Okay, so any other questions? So we could do it with acrylic paint. Let's get the lid on that. So we could do it with acrylic paints. We could do it with your scribble sticks, your gelatos, your distressed crayons, your inks. You could also do this with your inks. So smudging or sponging your inks across different backgrounds to get a sense of what they do. You know, also using your inks to see which runs when you apply water, which ones stay in place. All sorts of things. So they're the Dilutions paints. We use the gesso, like I said, masterclass in gesso coming up. And excellent, thanks Helen. Yeah, the gesso comes up really nicely in the journal. It's a way of having a really subtle background. Excellent. So crafters, I hope that's given you a chance to think about getting your paints out and getting to know your paints. Look, I know I come into mixed media through paper crafting and through card making. So when I started getting into paints, it was, you know, a bit expensive. Not expensive, some of them can be, or a bit scary, and I'd want to keep them and I wouldn't want to waste them. But then what happens if you don't use them is that they dry out and then you have really wasted them. So I want to invite you in this time to really get to know your craft supplies. Get those paints out, whether they're cheap student acrylics, which don't tend to have as much pigment in them, but still work just fine for many techniques, or whether they're right up to the professional grades, and there's so many different types of paints in between. And what you find between paint ranges and even within paint ranges, you could see with those dilution samples. Some are more opaque, some are more translucent, some will be runnier, some will be thicker. And there's different techniques you can do with the different sorts of paints. So what I need you to do is make sure you give us a thumbs up and a like, leave a comment, share this with your crafty friends so that we can bring you more crafting techniques. And if there's anything else you need to know, leave a note in the comments, whether you're watching us through the replay on Facebook or YouTube. We will certainly keep an eye on those comments as well. And we will be back soon for, of course, more craft with us. We've got some other projects on the go that I can't wait to announce to you. It's really exciting, but we'll just keep them under wraps for now while we're still working on the details. And of course, we'll be back on Monday with our picture to page update. So this is Michelle Brown signing off. I hope you have a crafty day.